Imagine risking everything, your life, your family, your entire world, for a love society says is impossible. In 1856, Mississippi, Anne Rutherford, a plantation owner's wife, did exactly that when she fell for Evelyn, her beautiful slave. Their forbidden romance would shake the foundations of Rutherford Hall and challenge everything the South believed about love, power, and freedom. Before we begin this incredible journey, please subscribe to the channel. Hit that notification bell and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. The carriage wheels crunched against the gravel as it approached the grand columns of Rutherford Hall. The carriage wheels crunched against the gravel as it approached the grand columns of Rutherford Hall. Inside, Evelyn pressed her face to the small window, watching Spanish moss sway like ghostly curtains in the humid Mississippi air. Her copper skin gleamed with perspiration. Chains clinked softly around her wrists. "Get out!" barked the slave trader, yanking the door open. Evelyn stepped onto the plantation's circular drive. The mansion loomed before her, 3 stories of pristine white columns and wraparound porches that seemed to stretch forever. She'd never seen anything so beautiful or so terrifying. "Mrs. Rutherford," the trader called, "your new purchase has arrived." Anne Rutherford emerged from the front door like a vision in pale blue silk. Her auburn hair was pinned in perfect ringlets, and her green eyes sparkled with curiosity. At 28, she carried herself with the grace of Southern aristocracy, but something in her expression softened when she saw Evelyn. "My goodness," Anne whispered, stepping closer. "You're quite lovely, aren't you?" Evelyn kept her eyes downcast. "Yes, ma'am. Look at me, child." Slowly, Evelyn raised her gaze. Their eyes met for the first time, green meeting brown in a moment that seemed to stretch forever. Anne's breath caught. There was intelligence in those dark eyes, dignity, something that made her heart skip unexpectedly. "What's your name?" "Evelyn, ma'am." "Evelyn." Anne tested the name on her tongue. "Beautiful. Can you read?" The slave trader laughed harshly. "Read, ma'am? She's field stock, strong back, good for—" "I asked her," Anne said sharply, never breaking eye contact with Evelyn. Evelyn hesitated. Reading was dangerous for slaves, forbidden. But something in this woman's eyes made her want to tell the truth. "Yes, ma'am." "A little." Anne's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Wonderful. You'll be working in the house. With me." The trader's face reddened. "Ma'am, I must protest. A slave who reads is trouble. Your husband, the colonel—" "My husband is fighting Yankees in Virginia," Anne interrupted coolly. "I'll decide what's best for my household." She turned back to Evelyn, her voice gentling. "Are you hungry, dear?" Evelyn's stomach had been empty for 2 days, but she'd learned not to show weakness. "I'm fine, Mum." "Nonsense, Martha," Anne called to an older black woman standing on the porch. "Please prepare a plate for Evelyn and show her to the blue room upstairs." Martha's eyes widened. The blue room was for guests, not slaves. "Ma'am," Martha said carefully, "perhaps the quarters would be more—" "The blue room," Anne repeated firmly. "She'll be my personal attendant. I want her close." Evelyn felt the world tilt. Personal attendant? A room in the main house? This wasn't how slavery worked. This wasn't how anything worked. The slave trader shook his head in disgust. "Your money, ma'am. But mark my words, that one's trouble. Too pretty, too smart. Nothing good comes from house slaves who think they're special." Anne handed him a leather pouch heavy with coins. "Good day, sir." As the trader's carriage disappeared down the oak-lined drive, Anne turned back to Evelyn. The afternoon sun caught the gold highlights in her hair, making her look almost ethereal. "Don't mind him," Anne said softly. "Some people see only what they expect to see." She stepped closer, close enough that Evelyn could smell her lavender perfume. "But I see you, Evelyn, really see you." Evelyn's heart hammered against her ribs. This woman was dangerous, not because she was cruel, but because she was kind. Kindness from a master was the most dangerous thing of all. "Thank you, ma'am," Evelyn whispered. Anne reached out as if to touch Evelyn's face, then caught herself. Her hand dropped to her side, but her eyes remained fixed on Evelyn's. "Come," Anne said, her voice slightly breathless. "Let me show you your room." As they walked toward the mansion's grand entrance, neither woman noticed the figure watching from an upstairs window. Samuel, the head butler, had served the Rutherford family for 30 years. He'd seen masters take interest in pretty slaves before, but this felt different, dangerous. He watched Mrs. Anne's face as she looked at the new girl, saw the flush in her cheeks, the way her hand trembled slightly as she gestured toward the door. Samuel had seen that look before, in his own mirror years ago when he'd fallen for a woman he could never have. This wasn't just interest, this was the beginning of something that could destroy them all. Inside the mansion, Anne led Evelyn up the sweeping staircase, past oil paintings of stern-faced Rutherford ancestors. Their footsteps echoed in the vast hallway. "This is your room," Anne said, opening a door to reveal a space larger than any cabin Evelyn had ever seen. Pale blue wallpaper, a four-poster bed with white linens, even a small writing desk by the window. Evelyn stared in shock. "Ma'am, I can't. This is too much." "It's perfect," Anne said firmly. "You'll need somewhere quiet to rest. Being my companion can be exhausting." The word companion hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning neither dared acknowledge. Anne moved to the window, gazing out at the cotton fields stretching to the horizon. "It gets lonely here, Evelyn, especially with my husband away so often." She turned back, and Evelyn saw something vulnerable in her expression, something hungry. "I have a feeling you and I are going to be very close." Evelyn's mouth went dry. She should say something proper, something safe. Instead, she heard herself whisper, "Yes, ma'am." "I think we are." The sun was setting, painting the room in shades of gold and amber. In that light, with her hair loose around her shoulders and her eyes bright with possibility, Anne Rutherford looked less like a plantation mistress and more like a woman on the edge of something she couldn't control. And Evelyn, despite every instinct screaming danger, found herself wanting to fall right alongside her. Outside, the first evening stars appeared in the darkening sky. In the slave quarters, whispers had already begun about the new girl in the big house, about the way Mrs. Anne had looked at her, about the storm that was surely coming. But in the blue room, as Anne finally left Evelyn alone with her thoughts, neither woman was thinking about consequences. They were thinking about tomorrow, about the long, lonely hours they would spend together, about the invisible thread that had connected them from the moment their eyes first met. Neither knew that by morning, everything would begin to change. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 7 times as Evelyn made her way to Anne's private sitting room. 3 days had passed since her arrival, and already she'd fallen into a routine that felt both natural and impossible. Anne was waiting by the window, still in her silk nightgown and robe. Her auburn hair fell loose down her back, catching the morning light like spun copper. "Good morning, Evelyn," she said, without turning around. "Did you sleep well?" "Yes, ma'am. Thank you." It was a lie. Evelyn had barely slept, her mind racing with thoughts of this strange new life. The comfort of the blue room felt like a beautiful trap. Anne finally turned, and Evelyn's breath caught. Without the armor of her daytime dresses and perfect hair, Anne looked younger, vulnerable, almost fragile. "I've been thinking," Anne said, settling into her favorite chair by the fireplace. "I'd like you to read to me this morning. Would you mind?" Evelyn's heart skipped. "What would you like me to read, ma'am?" Anne gestured to a leather-bound book on the side table. "Poetry, Keats, I think. My husband finds poetry frivolous, but I—" She trailed off, a shadow crossing her face. "Well, he's not here, is he?" Evelyn picked up the book, her fingers trembling slightly as she opened it. The pages were cream-colored and smooth, filled with elegant script that spoke of education and privilege, things she was never supposed to touch. "She walks in beauty like the night," Evelyn began, her voice soft but clear. Of cloudless climes and starry skies, Anne closed her eyes, leaning back in her chair. A small smile played at her lips as Evelyn's voice filled the room, rich and melodious despite her nervousness. "You have a beautiful voice," Anne murmured when Evelyn finished the poem. "Where did you learn to read so well?" Evelyn hesitated. The truth was dangerous, but something about Anne's gentle expression made her want to share it. "My previous master's daughter taught me," she said quietly. "Miss Caroline. She said it was wrong that I couldn't read the Bible for myself." "And what happened to Miss Caroline?" "She married and moved north. Her father sold me the next week." Evelyn's voice remained steady, but Anne caught the flash of pain in her dark eyes. "I'm sorry," Anne said, and she meant it. "That must have been difficult. It was just the way of things, ma'am." "No," Anne said firmly, leaning forward. "It wasn't right. None of this is right." The words hung between them like a confession. Evelyn stared at her, shocked by the admission. Anne seemed to realize what she'd said and looked away quickly. Well, you know what I mean. But Evelyn wasn't sure she did. Masters didn't usually question the system that gave them everything. Would you like me to continue reading, ma'am? Please, but come sit closer. I can barely hear you from there. Evelyn moved to the small ottoman near Anne's chair, close enough to smell her lavender soap and see the tiny freckles across her nose. As she read, Anne found herself watching Evelyn's face instead of listening to the words, the way her full lips shaped each syllable, the concentration in her dark eyes, the graceful curve of her neck. When had she started noticing such things? Ma'am? Evelyn had stopped reading and was looking at her with concern. Are you all right? Yes, forgive me. My mind wandered. Anne's cheeks flushed pink. Please, continue. But as Evelyn resumed reading, Anne's thoughts drifted again to her husband, Colonel James Rutherford, who'd been gone for 6 months fighting in Virginia, to their cold, formal marriage that had been arranged by their fathers, to the loneliness that had become her constant companion, and now to this beautiful, intelligent woman who made her feel things she'd never experienced before. Mrs. Anne, Martha's voice from the doorway made them both jump. Breakfast is ready, ma'am. Thank you, Martha. We'll be down shortly. Martha's eyes flicked between them, taking in how close they were sitting, the intimate atmosphere of the room. Her expression remained neutral, but Anne caught the slight tightening around her eyes. Actually, Anne said suddenly, I think I'll take breakfast in my room today. Could you bring a tray for 2? 2, ma'am? Yes, Evelyn will join me. Martha's eyebrows rose almost imperceptibly. Of course, ma'am. When Martha left, Evelyn started to stand. Ma'am, I should eat in the kitchen with the others. Nonsense, I enjoy your company. Anne's hand shot out, catching Evelyn's wrist to stop her from rising. The contact sent electricity through both women. Anne's fingers were soft and warm against Evelyn's skin, and for a moment neither moved. Then Anne realized what she'd done and jerked her hand back as if burned. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. It's all right, ma'am, Evelyn said softly, but her pulse was racing where Anne had touched her. They ate breakfast in Anne's bedroom, sitting at the small table by the window. Anne had never shared a meal with a slave before, but somehow it felt natural with Evelyn. They talked about books, about the changing seasons, about everything except the growing tension between them. Tell me about your family, Anne said as they finished eating. Evelyn's face shuttered. I don't have family anymore, ma'am. Everyone has family somewhere. Not slaves, Evelyn said quietly. We get sold away from each other, scattered like seeds in the wind. Anne felt a stab of guilt. Her own family owned 3 plantations and hundreds of slaves. How many families had they torn apart? I'm sorry, she whispered. Why are you sorry, ma'am? You didn't do anything. But Anne felt like she had, like her entire life was built on the suffering of people like Evelyn. What about you? Evelyn asked, surprising them both with her boldness. Do you have family? Anne smiled sadly. A husband I barely know, and parents who see me as a business arrangement. So no, not really. That sounds lonely. It is. Anne met Evelyn's eyes. Until now. The admission hung between them, dangerous and electric. Evelyn's heart hammered against her ribs. Ma'am, Anne, she said suddenly, when we're alone, call me Anne. Evelyn's eyes widened. Using a master's first name was unthinkable. Forbidden. I couldn't. Please. Anne's voice was barely a whisper. I need to hear someone say my name like I'm a real person, not just a title. Evelyn stared at her, seeing the loneliness and desperation in her green eyes. Against every instinct, every rule she'd ever learned, she whispered, Anne. The name fell between them like a stone into still water, sending ripples through everything they thought they knew about their world. Anne's breath caught. Hearing her name in Evelyn's soft voice felt like coming alive after years of sleepwalking. Again, she breathed, Anne. This time Anne reached out and took Evelyn's hand properly, intertwining their fingers. The touch was gentle but deliberate, and neither woman pulled away. This is dangerous, Evelyn whispered. I know. If anyone saw... I know. But neither of them let go. Outside, storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, dark and threatening. Inside Rutherford Hall, whispers had begun among the house slaves about their mistress and her new companion, about the way they looked at each other, about the closed doors and hushed conversations. Samuel watched it all with growing dread. He'd seen what happened when masters and slaves crossed certain lines. It never ended well for anyone. But as he passed Anne's bedroom and heard the soft murmur of voices, the occasional laugh, he couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, this time was different. Maybe this time love might be stronger than the world trying to tear it apart. He was wrong, of course, but for now, in the golden morning light streaming through Anne's bedroom window, with their hands clasped together like a promise, it felt possible. It felt like the beginning of something beautiful, even if it was also the beginning of something that would destroy everything they'd ever known. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, carried by a dust-covered rider who'd traveled hard from Virginia. Samuel brought it to Anne on a silver tray, his weathered face grave. "From the Colonel, ma'am," he said quietly. Anne's hands trembled as she broke the wax seal. Evelyn, who'd been arranging flowers nearby, froze at the mention of Colonel Rutherford. "He's coming home," Anne whispered, her face draining of color. "Next week." The crystal vase slipped from Evelyn's fingers, shattering against the marble floor. Water and white roses scattered everywhere. "I'm sorry," Evelyn gasped, dropping to her knees to gather the pieces. "I'm so sorry." "Leave it," Anne said sharply, then caught herself. Martha will clean it later." "Are you hurt?" Evelyn shook her head, but Anne was already kneeling beside her, checking her hands for cuts. Their faces were inches apart, and for a moment the world narrowed to just the two of them. "Ma'am," Samuel cleared his throat pointedly, "should I prepare the Colonel's rooms?" Anne jerked back to reality, her cheeks flushing. "Yes, of course. The blue room will need to be reassigned." Evelyn's heart sank. Of course. She'd known this day would come, but somehow she'd let herself forget, let herself believe in the impossible. "Where should I move my things?" she asked quietly. Anne's jaw tightened. "The servants' quarters, I suppose. It's what's expected." The words tasted like ash in her mouth. That evening, as Evelyn packed her few belongings, Anne stood in the doorway watching. Neither spoke about what they were really losing. Not just a room, but their sanctuary, their stolen moments of freedom. "He'll want to know about you," Anne said finally. "About why I chose you as my personal attendant. What will you tell him?" "The truth, that you're intelligent, well-spoken, and useful." Anne paused. "He doesn't need to know the rest. The rest. The long afternoons reading poetry, the shared meals, the way Anne had started touching Evelyn's hand when she laughed, the way they'd begun looking at each other like drowning people reaching for air." "Anne," Evelyn whispered, using the forbidden name one last time. "What happens now?" Anne's composure cracked. "I don't know." Colonel James Rutherford arrived the following Tuesday in a cloud of dust and military precision. He was a tall, imposing man with steel-gray hair and cold blue eyes that missed nothing. War had hardened him further, adding new lines to his weathered face and a permanent tension to his shoulders. Anne waited on the front porch in her finest dress, every inch the perfect southern wife. Evelyn stood behind her with the other house servants, eyes downcast, invisible. "My dear," the colonel said, dismounting his horse with practiced ease. He kissed Anne's cheek, a brief perfunctory gesture that held no warmth. "Welcome home, James," Anne replied, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her chest. His eyes swept over the assembled servants, cataloguing faces, noting changes. When his gaze landed on Evelyn, it lingered. "New acquisition?" he asked. "Yes, this is Evelyn. She's been serving as my personal attendant." The colonel circled Evelyn slowly, like a buyer examining livestock. She kept her eyes fixed on the ground, but she could feel his scrutiny like a physical weight. "Pretty," he said finally. "Expensive. Reasonably priced for her skills." "Skills?" His eyebrow arched. "What skills does a house slave need beyond cleaning and serving?" Anne's throat tightened. "She reads well. I've had her help with correspondence. It was a lie, but a believable one." The colonel nodded approvingly. "Good. Educated slaves are useful, as long as they remember their place." His voice carried a warning that made Evelyn's skin crawl. That night at dinner, the colonel regaled Anne with stories from the war. His voice was animated as he described battles and strategies, but Anne found herself thinking about Evelyn, alone in the servants' quarters for the first time in weeks. "You're quiet tonight," the colonel observed, cutting into his beef with military precision. "I'm just glad you're home safely." "Are you?" His blue eyes studied her face. "You seem different. distant. Anne's heart hammered. It's been a long time, James. We both need time to readjust. Indeed, he took a sip of wine. Tell me about this Evelyn. How long has she been here? About a month. And you spend considerable time with her. The question seemed casual, but Anne caught the sharp edge beneath it. She's my personal attendant. Of course we spend time together. Of course. The Colonel's smile didn't reach his eyes. I'd like to observe her work tomorrow, ensure she's meeting your needs adequately. Anne's blood turned to ice. That's not necessary. I insist. A man must know what's happening in his own house. In the servants' quarters, Evelyn lay awake on her narrow cot, listening to the whispered conversations around her. The other slaves were curious about her time in the big house, but she deflected their questions with careful non-answers. That girl's trouble, she heard Martha murmur to Samuel in the corner. Mark my words, the Colonel's going to see right through whatever's been happening. What's been happening? Asked Lucy, one of the younger maids. Nothing good, Samuel replied grimly. Nothing that ends well for any of us. Evelyn closed her eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. She thought about Anne alone in that big house with her cold husband, about the way Anne's face had lit up when she laughed, about the gentle touch of her fingers. All of it felt like a dream now, a beautiful, impossible dream that was rapidly becoming a nightmare. The next morning, the Colonel positioned himself in the main parlor, where he could observe the household's daily routine. Anne tried to act normally, but every interaction with Evelyn felt stilted and strange under his watchful gaze. Bring me my correspondence, Anne instructed, her voice more formal than it had been in weeks. Yes, ma'am, Evelyn replied, keeping her eyes down. But as she handed Anne the letters, their fingers brushed for just an instant. It was barely a touch, but the Colonel's sharp eyes caught it. Evelyn, he said suddenly, come here. Evelyn approached slowly, her heart pounding. Look at me when I speak to you. She raised her eyes reluctantly, meeting his cold stare. You seem quite comfortable in this house. Perhaps too comfortable. I serve Mrs. Rutherford to the best of my ability, sir. I'm sure you do. His voice was silk over steel. But remember, girl, comfort can be dangerous for everyone involved. The threat was clear. Evelyn nodded quickly. Yes, sir. Good, you may go. As Evelyn hurried from the room, the Colonel turned to his wife. Anne was pale, her hands clenched in her lap. She's quite devoted to you, he observed. She's a good servant. Yes, perhaps too good. He moved closer, his presence looming over her. Anne, my dear, I hope you haven't forgotten your position while I've been away, or allowed others to forget theirs. Anne met his gaze steadily, though her heart was racing. I don't know what you mean. Don't you? He leaned down, his voice dropping to a whisper. I've been watching, my dear. I see how you look at her, how she looks at you. It's concerning. James, you're imagining things, am I? His hand gripped her chin, forcing her to look at him. Because if I thought my wife was developing inappropriate attachments to the help, well, that would be a problem. A serious problem. Anne's blood turned to ice. You're hurting me. He released her abruptly. I would never hurt you, my dear, but I can't say the same for others who might overstep their bounds. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Anne understood perfectly. If he suspected anything between her and Evelyn, it wouldn't be Anne who paid the price. It would be Evelyn. That night, as the Colonel slept beside her, Anne stared at the ceiling and made a terrible decision. She would have to end it. Whatever was growing between her and Evelyn, whatever feelings had bloomed in the safety of his absence, it all had to stop. Because love, she realized, wasn't always enough to protect the people you cared about. Sometimes love meant letting go before it destroyed everything you were trying to save. But as she lay there in the darkness, listening to her husband's steady breathing, Anne couldn't shake the feeling that it was already too late. The Colonel had seen too much, suspected too much, and in the morning everything would begin to unravel. The storm had been building all day, dark clouds rolling across the Mississippi sky like an omen. By evening, rain lashed against the windows of Rutherford Hall with violent intensity, and thunder shook the very foundations of the grand mansion. Colonel Rutherford had retired early, claiming exhaustion from his journey. Anne waited in her sitting room, listening to his heavy footsteps fade down the hallway, followed by the decisive click of his bedroom door. She shouldn't go to Evelyn. She knew that. After 3 days of her husband's watchful presence, after his thinly veiled threats, she should stay away. But the storm called to something wild in her chest, and the loneliness felt like it might swallow her whole. Lightning illuminated the servants' quarters as Anne made her way across the muddy courtyard, her shawl pulled tight against the driving rain. She'd never ventured to the slave quarters before. It was unthinkable for a woman of her station. But nothing about the past month had been thinkable. She found Evelyn sitting by the small window in the communal room, mending a torn dress by candlelight. The other servants had long since gone to bed, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the storm. "Anne?" Evelyn gasped, jumping to her feet. "What are you doing here?" Anne stood dripping in the doorway, her hair plastered to her head, her fine dress ruined by rain and mud. She looked wild, desperate, beautiful. "I couldn't stay away," Anne whispered. "I tried, but I couldn't." Evelyn glanced around frantically. "You can't be here. If someone sees—" "Everyone's asleep. The storm will cover any sound." But even as she said it, Anne knew how reckless this was, how dangerous. Her husband slept less than 100 yards away, and here she was standing in the slave quarters like some lovesick girl. "Anne, please," Evelyn begged, "go back to the house. Forget about me. Forget about all of this." "I can't." Anne stepped closer, her green eyes bright with unshed tears. "I've tried. God knows I've tried. But I can't stop thinking about you." Thunder crashed overhead, and in the flash of lightning that followed, they could see the truth written on each other's faces. This wasn't just loneliness or curiosity anymore. This was something deeper, more dangerous. This was love. "We can't," Evelyn whispered, but her resolve was crumbling. "You know we can't." "I know." Anne reached out, her fingers trembling as they touched Evelyn's cheek. "But I'm here anyway." Evelyn closed her eyes, leaning into the touch despite every instinct screaming at her to run. Anne's hand was soft and warm, and it had been so long since anyone had touched her with tenderness. "Tell me to leave," Anne whispered. "Tell me to go back to my cold husband and my empty life, and I will." Evelyn opened her eyes, meeting Anne's desperate gaze. She should say it. Should send this beautiful, broken woman back to safety. Should protect them both from the storm that was coming. Instead, she whispered, "Stay." The word hung between them like a bridge they couldn't uncross. Anne's breath caught, and then she was moving forward, closing the distance between them until they were inches apart. "Evelyn," she breathed. "I know," Evelyn whispered back. "I know it's impossible. I know it's dangerous, but You what? I love you." The confession fell between them like lightning, illuminating everything they'd been trying to hide. Anne's eyes filled with tears. "I love you too," she whispered. "God help me, I love you too." And then they were kissing, soft and desperate and full of months of longing. Anne's hands tangled in Evelyn's dark hair, and Evelyn pulled her closer, as if she could somehow make this moment last forever. When they finally broke apart, both women were crying. "What are we going to do?" Evelyn whispered. Anne wiped the tears from Evelyn's cheeks with gentle fingers. "I don't know. But I can't go back to pretending you don't exist. I can't go back to that life. Your husband suspects something, I know. He'll kill me if he finds out. You know that, don't you?" Anne's face crumpled. "I won't let that happen. How can you stop it? You're his wife. I'm his property. We have no power here." "Then we'll find power somewhere else." Evelyn stared at her. "What are you saying?" Anne took her hands, gripping them tightly. "I'm saying maybe we don't have to stay here. Maybe we don't have to live by their rules." "Anne, that's impossible. Where would we go? How would we survive?" "North. There are people who help runaway slaves, and I have money, jewelry I could sell." "You're talking about running away with a slave. Do you understand what that means? You'd lose everything. Your family, your position, your entire life." "What life?" Anne laughed bitterly. "A loveless marriage to a man who sees me as property, a society that values me only for my ability to produce heirs and host dinner parties. That's not living, Evelyn. That's just existing." Thunder rolled overhead, and rain continued to pound against the small windows. In the candlelight, Anne looked ethereal, otherworldly, like something from a dream. "You don't know what you're saying," Evelyn said softly. "You've never been hungry, never been cold, never been hunted like an animal." "Then teach me." Anne's voice was fierce, determined. "Teach me how to survive. Teach me how to be strong." "Anne, I'm serious. I'd rather have 1 year of real life with you than 50 years of this beautiful prison." Evelyn searched her face, looking for doubt, for the moment when reality would crash back in. But all she saw was love and determination, and a kind of desperate courage that took her breath away. "It would be dangerous," she whispered. "I know. We might not make it. I know. Your husband will come after us. He'll never stop looking. I know." Anne cupped Evelyn's face in her hands. "But I'd rather die free with you than live as a slave to his expectations." Outside, the storm was beginning to pass, the thunder growing more distant. Soon dawn would come, and with it, the return of the impossible world they lived in. But for now, in this small room lit by candlelight, they held each other and planned their escape from everything they'd ever known. "When?" Evelyn asked. "Soon, before he becomes more suspicious, before he decides you're too dangerous to keep around." "How?" "I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out." Anne kissed her softly. "I promise you, Evelyn, I'll find a way." They talked through the night, making plans that seemed both impossible and inevitable. Anne would gather what money and jewelry she could without arousing suspicion. Evelyn would learn what she could about the Underground Railroad from the other slaves. As the first pale light of dawn crept through the windows, Anne knew she had to go. The household would be waking soon, and her absence would be noticed. "I have to leave," she whispered. Evelyn nodded, though her heart was breaking. "I know. This isn't goodbye. This is just until we can be together properly." "Promise me something," Evelyn said suddenly. "Anything. Promise me that if it becomes too dangerous, if he suspects too much, you'll forget about me. You'll save yourself." Anne's eyes flashed. "Never." "Promise me." "No." Anne's voice was firm. "I won't promise to abandon you. I won't promise to go back to being half alive." She kissed Evelyn one more time, pouring all her love and determination into the touch. "I'll find a way," she whispered against Evelyn's lips. "I swear to you, I'll find a way." And then she was gone, slipping back through the rain toward the big house, leaving Evelyn alone with the dying candle and the weight of impossible hope. Neither woman saw the figure watching from the shadows of the main house. Samuel had been awake all night, worried about the storm and the strange sounds he'd heard. He'd seen Mrs. Anne leave the house, seen her return just as dawn was breaking, her dress muddy and her hair wild, and he knew, with the certainty of a man who'd lived through too much, that everything was about to change. The storm had passed, but a much more dangerous tempest was just beginning. 3 days after the storm, everything unraveled with the speed of a house fire. It started with a letter. Samuel found it first, tucked beneath a loose floorboard in Evelyn's quarters during the weekly inspection. His weathered hands shook as he unfolded the cream-colored paper, expensive stationery that no slave should possess. "My dearest Evelyn," it began in Anne's elegant script, "I've found a contact in Natchez who can help us reach the north. We leave in 2 days. Meet me in the rose garden at midnight. All my love." A. Samuel's blood turned to ice. He'd suspected something was brewing between the mistress and the new girl, but this was beyond dangerous. This was suicide. For a moment, he considered destroying the letter, pretending he'd never seen it. But then he thought about what would happen when the colonel discovered his wife missing, the rage that would follow, the innocent slaves who would pay the price for Mrs. Anne's rebellion. With a heavy heart, Samuel made his choice. He found Colonel Rutherford in his study, cleaning his service revolver with methodical precision. The older man looked up as Samuel entered, noting the slave's pale complexion and trembling hands. "What is it, Samuel?" Without a word, Samuel placed the letter on the mahogany desk. The colonel read it twice, his face growing darker with each word. When he finished, the silence in the room was deafening. "Where did you find this?" His voice was deadly quiet. "In the girls' quarters, sir. Hidden under a floorboard." The colonel stood slowly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "How long have you known?" "I suspected something, sir, but I never imagined this." "Of course you didn't." The colonel's laugh was bitter. "None of us imagined my wife would lose her mind over a slave." He moved to the window, staring out at the cotton fields where slaves bent under the afternoon sun. His reflection in the glass looked like a stranger, older, harder, with eyes that promised violence. "Sir," Samuel said carefully, "what do you want me to do?" The colonel was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the chill of winter. "Bring them both to me. Now." Anne was in her sitting room, pretending to read while her mind raced with plans for their escape. Tomorrow night. Tomorrow night, she and Evelyn would leave this place forever. She looked up as Samuel entered, immediately sensing something wrong in his posture. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "the Colonel requests your presence in his study, immediately." Anne's heart skipped. Did he say why? Samuel's eyes were full of sorrow and regret. "No, ma'am. But he asked for Evelyn, too." The world tilted. Anne gripped the arms of her chair, fighting the wave of nausea that crashed over her. "Samuel," she whispered, "what have you done?" "I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm so sorry." Anne closed her eyes, understanding flooding through her. Someone had found the letter. Their secret was out. "Where is she?" "Being brought to the study now, ma'am." Anne stood on unsteady legs. Whatever was about to happen, she wouldn't let Evelyn face it alone. The study felt like a tomb when Anne entered. Her husband stood behind his desk. The letter spread before him like evidence at a trial. Evelyn was already there, flanked by two of the larger male slaves who served as overseers. Her beautiful face was pale but composed, her dark eyes meeting Anne's with a mixture of love and resignation. "Sit down, my dear," the Colonel said to Anne, his voice terrifyingly calm. Anne remained standing. "James, I can explain." "Explain?" He picked up the letter, waving it in the air. "Explain how my wife has been conducting an affair with a slave. Explain how you plan to run away like some common criminal. It's not what you think, isn't it?" He moved around the desk, stopping inches from her face. "Tell me, Anne, what exactly is it?" Anne lifted her chin, meeting his furious gaze. "It's love." The slap came so fast she didn't see it coming. Her head snapped to the side, and she tasted blood where her teeth cut her lip. "Don't," Evelyn said sharply, taking a step forward despite the hands restraining her. "Don't touch her." The Colonel turned to Evelyn with interest. "Ah, the slave speaks. How refreshing." He circled her slowly, like a predator sizing up prey. "Tell me, girl, did you seduce my wife? Did you use your feminine wiles to corrupt a good Christian woman?" "No, sir." "No? Then how do you explain this?" He held up the letter again. Evelyn's voice was steady, fearless. "Mrs. Rutherford is lonely. I provided companionship, nothing more." "Companionship?" The Colonel tasted the word. "Is that what we're calling it?" He backhanded Evelyn across the face, the sound echoing through the room like a gunshot. Blood trickled from her split lip, but she didn't cry out. "Stop it!" Anne lunged forward, but the Colonel caught her wrist, his grip bruising. "You will be silent," he hissed. "You've done enough damage." He released Anne and turned back to Evelyn. "You know what the punishment is for a slave who touches a white woman?" Evelyn's composure finally cracked. "Please, sir, Mrs. Rutherford is innocent. This was all my doing. I forced myself on her. She was too kind to refuse." "Evelyn, no," Anne whispered, understanding what she was trying to do. But Evelyn continued, her voice growing stronger. "I'm the one who wrote the letter. I forged her handwriting. She never agreed to run away with me. She was going to turn me in." The Colonel studied her face, looking for deception. "You're lying." "I'm not, sir. Check the handwriting. You'll see it's not quite right." Anne watched in horror as Evelyn sacrificed herself, trying to save her with lies that might actually work. The Colonel was a proud man. He'd rather believe his wife was an innocent victim than admit she'd chosen a slave over him. "Even if that were true," the Colonel said slowly, "you still committed an unforgivable crime. You still touched what belongs to me." "Yes, sir, and you know what happens to slaves who forget their place?" Evelyn's voice was barely a whisper. "Yes, sir," the Colonel smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression Anne had ever seen. "Good. Then you understand why I have to make an example of you." "James, please," Anne begged. "If you believe she forced herself on me, then I'm the victim here. Surely that counts for something." "Oh, it does, my dear. It means you'll live." He turned to the overseers. "Take her to the whipping post. 20 lashes. Then lock her in the root cellar until I decide what to do with her." "No!" Anne threw herself at her husband, clawing at his face. "You can't. I won't let you." The Colonel grabbed her wrists, holding her easily. "You have no choice in the matter. She's innocent, I'm telling you, she's innocent." "Then why are you so desperate to save her?" The question hung in the air like a trap. Anne realized too late that her reaction had given them away more thoroughly than any letter could. The Colonel's eyes narrowed. "Unless you're not as innocent as she claims." Anne's silence was answer enough. "I see." His voice dropped to a whisper. "My wife. The adulteress. My wife. The slave lover. He released her so suddenly she stumbled backward. 20 lashes, he repeated to the overseers, and make sure my wife watches. She needs to understand the consequences of her choices. As they dragged Evelyn from the room, she looked back at Anne one last time. Her eyes were full of love and forgiveness and a terrible kind of peace. I don't regret it, she said clearly. I don't regret loving you. And then she was gone, leaving Anne alone with her husband and the wreckage of their impossible dream. Outside, storm clouds were gathering again. But this time, Anne knew no amount of rain would wash away what was coming. The scandal had broken. The secret was out. And tomorrow, everything they'd built together would burn. The whip fell 20 times, each crack echoing across the plantation like thunder. Anne was forced to watch from the veranda, her husband's iron grip on her arm, ensuring she couldn't look away. Evelyn never cried out, not once. By the time it was over, her back was a canvas of blood and torn flesh, but her spirit remained unbroken. As they carried her unconscious form to the root cellar, Anne felt something die inside her chest. And something else, something fierce and desperate, was born. Let this be a lesson, the colonel announced to the assembled slaves. This is what happens when you forget your place, when you reach for things that don't belong to you. His eyes found Anne's. It applies to everyone. That night, Anne sat in her bedroom like a prisoner, listening to her husband's heavy footsteps pacing the hallway outside. He'd locked her in, posting guards at the windows. She was trapped as surely as Evelyn was in that underground cell. But Anne Rutherford had been raised by a father who taught her that surrender was never an option. She waited until the house grew quiet, until even the guards' footsteps faded. Then she moved to her jewelry box, selecting pieces that would be easy to carry and valuable enough to buy passage north. Her grandmother's emerald necklace, her mother's diamond earrings, the ruby bracelet James had given her on their wedding day. She wrapped them in a silk scarf and tucked the bundle into her corset. Next she gathered what money she could find, coins from her personal allowance, bills hidden in her writing desk. It wasn't much, but it would have to be enough. The hardest part was the letter. James, she wrote, her hand steady despite the trembling in her chest. By the time you read this, I will be gone. I cannot live in a world where love is a crime and kindness is punished with violence. I choose freedom over safety, love over duty. Do not look for me, you will not find me. Anne. She left it on her pillow, knowing it would be hours before anyone discovered her absence. The root cellar was a nightmare of darkness and dampness, carved into the earth beneath the kitchen. Anne had to feel her way down the wooden steps, her heart hammering as she called Evelyn's name in a whisper. Anne! Evelyn's voice was weak, barely audible. You shouldn't be here. Anne found her in the corner, curled on her side on a bed of mouldy straw. Even in the darkness she could see the dark stains on Evelyn's torn dress, could smell the metallic scent of blood. Oh, my love, Anne breathed, kneeling beside her. What has he done to you? Nothing I can't survive. Evelyn tried to sit up and gasped in pain. But you need to leave. If he finds you here, he won't. Anne helped her stand, supporting most of her weight. We're leaving tonight. Anne, no. You can't. After what happened today, he'll be watching everything. We'll never make it. We have to try. Anne's voice was fierce with determination. I won't leave you here to die. I'm not going to die. He needs me alive to maintain his reputation. A dead slave would raise questions. And what about tomorrow or next week? How long before his anger gets the better of him? Evelyn was quiet, knowing Anne was right. The colonel's rage was a living thing, and it would only grow with time. Where would we go? She whispered. North. I have contacts in Natchez who can help us reach the Underground Railroad. Anne pulled the bundle of jewelry from her corset. And I have money. Evelyn stared at the fortune in Anne's hands. More wealth than most slaves would see in a lifetime. You'd give up everything for me? I already have. Anne cupped Evelyn's face gently, careful of her injuries. The moment I fell in love with you, I gave up everything that came before. They made their way through the plantation like ghosts, avoiding the main paths, staying in the shadows of the oak trees. Evelyn's injuries slowed them down, but her knowledge of the property's hidden roots proved invaluable. They were almost to the river when they heard the dogs. He knows, Evelyn gasped, stumbling against Anne. He's found the letter. Behind them, torches flickered through the trees like angry stars. The colonel's voice carried on the night air, shouting orders to his men. "The river," Anne said urgently. "If we can reach the river, the water will hide our scent." They ran, crashing through underbrush and thorns that tore at their clothes and skin. Evelyn's strength was failing, but Anne half carried her, driven by desperation and love. The Mississippi stretched before them, dark and wide and treacherous. A small rowboat was tied to the dock, their salvation, if they could reach it. "Stop right there." The colonel's voice froze them 20 yards from the water. They turned to see him emerging from the tree line, his service revolver gleaming in the moonlight. Behind him came his men, armed and angry. "Did you really think you could run from me?" he asked, his voice deadly calm. "Did you think I wouldn't find you?" Anne stepped in front of Evelyn, shielding her with her body. "Let her go, James. Your quarrel is with me. My quarrel is with both of you." He raised the gun, pointing it directly at Evelyn's heart. "You've made a mockery of my name, of my family, of everything I stand for. Please," Anne begged, "I'll come back. I'll be the wife you want. Just let her live." The colonel's laugh was bitter. "You think I'd take you back? After this? After you chose a slave over your own husband? Then kill me too, but don't make her pay for my choices." "Oh, but she will pay." His finger tightened on the trigger. "She'll pay for seducing my wife. For corrupting a good Christian woman, for forgetting her place." "I never forgot my place," Evelyn said suddenly, her voice carrying across the water. "My place is with the woman I love, and if that's a crime, then I'm guilty." She stepped out from behind Anne, meeting the colonel's gaze without fear. "But so is she, and if you kill me, you'll have to kill her too, because she'll never stop fighting for what we have." The colonel's face twisted with rage. "Then perhaps I will." The gunshot shattered the night, but it wasn't the colonel who fired. Samuel stood behind him, smoking rifle in his hands, his weathered face grim with determination. The colonel crumpled to the ground, clutching his shoulder. "Run," Samuel said simply. "I'll hold them off as long as I can." Anne stared at him in shock. "Samuel, why?" "Because some things are worth fighting for," Samuel said, his eyes meeting Anne's. "Even when they seem impossible." The other men hesitated, confused by their leader's fall. In that moment of chaos, Anne and Evelyn ran for the boat. "Stop them!" the colonel roared from the ground, blood seeping through his fingers. Gunshots rang out as Anne fumbled with the rope. Evelyn collapsed into the boat, her strength finally giving out. Anne pushed off from the dock just as bullets splintered the wood around them. The current caught them immediately, pulling them into the dark heart of the Mississippi. Behind them, Rutherford Hall blazed with torches and fury. "Samuel," Evelyn whispered, watching the old man disappear into the chaos. "He chose his side," Anne said, rowing desperately against the current. "Just like we chose ours." As they drifted downstream, a new glow appeared on the horizon. Orange flames licked at the night sky, growing brighter with each passing moment. "The house," Anne breathed. Rutherford Hall was burning. Whether from an overturned torch in the confusion or something more deliberate, they would never know. But as they watched their former prison consumed by fire, both women felt something like justice in the flames. The colonel's shouts grew fainter as the river carried them away from everything they'd ever known, away from slavery and suffocating marriages and a world that said their love was impossible. "Where do we go now?" Evelyn asked, her head resting against Anne's shoulder. Anne looked ahead to where the river curved north, toward freedom and uncertainty, and a future they would have to build with their own hands. "Anywhere but here," she said. "Everywhere but here." The boat drifted on through the darkness, carrying two women who had chosen love over safety, freedom over comfort, each other over everything else the world had to offer. Behind them, Rutherford Hall burned like a funeral pyre for the life they were leaving behind. Ahead lay the unknown, dangerous, difficult, but theirs to face together. And for the first time in either of their lives, that felt like enough. 5 years later, Boston, Massachusetts, 1861. The morning sun streamed through the lace curtains of the small apartment above the bakery, casting golden patterns across the worn wooden floor. Evelyn stood at the window, watching the bustling street below where free black families walked openly, where children played without fear, where the very air seemed to breathe with possibility. She still bore the scars from that terrible night, thin white lines across her back that would never fully fade. but her eyes held a peace that hadn't been there in Mississippi. "The bread's ready," she called softly. Anne emerged from the kitchen, flour dusting her simple brown dress, her once perfect hands now calloused from honest work. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and her face had lost the porcelain pallor of Southern aristocracy, bronzed now by sun and labor. She looked nothing like the plantation mistress she'd once been. She looked free. "Mrs. Patterson wants an extra loaf today," Anne said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Her son's coming home from the war." They'd taken new names when they reached Boston. Anne and Evelyn Morrison, sisters who'd fled the violence in Kansas. It was a thin fiction, but in a city full of refugees and runaways, no one looked too closely at their story. The bakery had been Anne's idea. She'd sold her jewelry piece by piece, using the money to buy this small shop in a neighborhood where mixed couples weren't entirely uncommon. They worked side by side, Anne handling the business while Evelyn's gentle manner with customers brought them back again and again. It wasn't the life either had imagined, but it was theirs. "Any word from Samuel?" Evelyn asked, as she did every morning. Anne shook her head. They'd tried to find news of the old butler who'd saved their lives, but the trail had gone cold somewhere in Alabama. They could only hope he'd found his own freedom, his own peace. The bell above the door chimed, and a familiar figure entered. Dr. William Hayes, one of the few people who knew their real story, removed his hat with a grave expression. "Ladies," he said quietly, "I have news from the South." Anne's heart clenched. For 5 years they'd lived in fear of this moment. The knock on the door. The stranger with news from their past. "What is it?" she asked. Dr. Hayes pulled a newspaper from his coat. "Colonel James Rutherford is dead." The words hit Anne like a physical blow. She sank into the nearest chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. "How?" Evelyn asked, moving to Anne's side. "Killed at Bull Run, fighting for the Confederacy." Dr. Hayes's voice was gentle. "According to this obituary, he died heroically defending Southern honor." Anne laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Southern honor, is that what they're calling it?" "There's more," Dr. Hayes continued. "The plantation was destroyed in the fire that night, never rebuilt. The land was sold to pay his debts." Evelyn took Anne's hand, intertwining their fingers. "It's over," she whispered. "It's really over." But Anne felt no relief, only a strange emptiness. The man who'd haunted her nightmares for 5 years was gone, but his death brought no peace. Only the hollow echo of a life wasted on hatred and pride. "What about the slaves?" Anne asked suddenly. "What happened to them?" Dr. Hayes consulted the paper again. "Scattered to other plantations mostly, though," he paused, a small smile crossing his face. "There are reports of several who simply disappeared that night, vanished into the chaos." Anne closed her eyes, hoping Samuel was among them, hoping he'd found his way to freedom. That evening they walked along the Charles River, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and crimson. Other couples strolled the paths, some white, some black, some mixed like them. In Boston, love took many forms, and most people had learned to mind their own business. "Do you ever regret it?" Anne asked suddenly. "Leaving everything behind?" Evelyn was quiet for a long moment, considering. "I regret the pain we caused others. I regret that Samuel paid a price for our freedom. I regret that we had to run instead of fight." She stopped walking, turning to face Anne fully. "But I don't regret loving you. I don't regret choosing this life over that one." Anne smiled, the first real smile she'd managed since hearing about James's death. "Even though we're poor, even though we work with our hands, even though we'll never be accepted by polite society, especially because of those things." Evelyn cupped Anne's face gently. "We're not playing roles anymore, Anne. We're not pretending to be something we're not. This is real. This is ours." They kissed there by the river, soft and sweet and unashamed. A few passers-by glanced their way, but no one stopped, no one stared. In this place, at this time, their love was just another part of the world's beautiful complexity. As they walked home, Anne thought about the letter she'd been writing, her memoirs, the true story of Rutherford Hall, and the love that had burned it down. Dr. Hayes thought it might be published, might help people understand that the war being fought wasn't just about politics or economics. It was about the right to love freely, to choose your own path, to be human in a world that wanted to make you property. "I've been thinking," Anne said as they climbed the stairs to their apartment, "about expanding the bakery. Maybe hiring some of the new refugees coming up from the south. Evelyn smiled. Giving others what we found here, something like that. They prepared for bed in comfortable silence, moving around each other with the easy familiarity of long partnership. Anne brushed out Evelyn's hair while Evelyn mended a tear in Anne's work dress. Simple domestic rituals that would have been impossible in their old life. Anne, Evelyn said softly, as they settled into their narrow bed. Yes, I love you. Not because you saved me, not because you gave up everything for me. I love you because of who you are when all the pretense is stripped away. Anne pulled her closer, breathing in the scent of flower and vanilla that always clung to Evelyn's hair. I love you too, she whispered. I love the life we've built. I love that we're free to choose each other every single day. Outside their window, Boston slept peacefully. Somewhere to the south, a war raged over the very questions their love had raised. Who deserved freedom, who deserved dignity, who deserved the right to love without fear. But here, in this small room above a bakery, two women who had risked everything for love held each other close and dreamed of tomorrow. They'd lost a plantation but gained a world, lost wealth but found purpose, lost the approval of society but gained something far more precious, the approval of their own hearts. It wasn't the ending either had imagined when they first met in that grand mansion with its white columns and dark secrets. It was better. It was real. It was theirs. And as Anne drifted off to sleep in Evelyn's arms, she whispered a prayer of gratitude for the courage to choose love over fear, freedom over safety, truth over the beautiful lies that had once defined her world. The beautiful slave who had made her mistress fall in love hadn't just changed one woman's heart. She'd changed everything. If this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel for more tales of love, courage, and the fight for freedom. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that love always finds a way. And let me know in the comments what story you'd like to hear next. Until then, remember, sometimes the most beautiful endings come from the most impossible beginnings.